April 20th meeting of 2023 of the Ann Arbor Renters Commission. As you all know, the purpose of the Renters Commission is to advise the City Council and the City Administrator in matters affecting renters in the City of Ann Arbor. The Ann Arbor Renters Commission is made up of voting members appointed by the mayor and approved by City Council, 2 non-voting City Council liaisons, 1 non-voting liaison from the Housing and Human Services Advisory Board. I think that seat is currently vacant. 2 non-voting members representing different landlord perspectives, and a non-voting representative from the University of Michigan Student Legal Services. To speak during any of the public comment opportunities, you will be able to speak through the webinar link if you're calling in through Zoom, or by phone. For phone access, please call 877-853-5247 and enter meeting ID 935-8080-1941. That's meeting ID 935-8080-1941. To be called on to speak, if you're calling with your phone, press *9 or use the raise hand function if you're calling in through Zoom. You can always access the web link through a2gov.org/renters commission meeting with a capital first letter of each of those words. And then you'll be called upon by city staff, and you'll be able to give your 3-minute comment period. After 3 minutes, you'll be placed on mute so that the next speaker can give their comment. So let's move on to roll call. Same as always, because it's electronic, we have to say where we're calling from. So I am here, I'm calling from Ann Arbor. Commissioner Chen, absent. Commissioner Peterson.
I'm here calling from Ann Arbor.
Welcome. Commissioner Kelly is also absent. Commissioner Cohen-Smith appears they're absent.
Actually, she resigned, didn't she?
Is that official?
She was not seeking reappointment, so her appointment goes through May, I believe.
Okay, that's what I thought. Thank you. Commissioner Rumel.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm here, Ann Arbor Township.
Wonderful. Welcome.
Had some popcorn there.
Commissioner Droppelman.
Present in Ann Arbor.
Welcome. Commissioner Else.
I am here in Ann Arbor.
Welcome. Commissioner Lowe's.
Present in Ann Arbor.
Welcome. Commissioner Tibbetts.
I am here in Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Rosen.
I'm here calling in from Ann Arbor.
Welcome. Councilmember Redina.
Here in Ann Arbor.
Councilmember Harrison.
Here in Ann Arbor.
Welcome. So, City of Ann Arbor staff. Kristen.
I'm here, and Attorney John Reiser will be here.
Wonderful. Okay. Now, throughout the meeting, I know we've been using first names. If you're uncomfortable with that, just you can speak up during the meeting, and if you prefer to be, use the last name, your title, that's totally fine. Just let me know either during the meeting or send me an email. Always open to feedback. Okay. So moving on to number 3, item 3, approval of agenda. Is there a motion to approve tonight's agenda?
So moved.
Moved by Jeff. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Lucy. Thank you. All those in favor of approving our agenda, say aye.
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 Aye. All those opposed, say nay. Okay, unanimously approved. Move on to item 4, approval of last meeting's minutes. So we have the minutes of March 16th's meeting of 2023. Is there a motion to approve the meetings from last minute? The minutes from our last meeting, rather.
Motion.
Okay, thank you, Lucy. Motion by Lucy. Seconded. Do we have a second?
Seconded.
Seconded by Jeff. Thanks. Let's see. All those in favor of approving last meeting's minutes, say aye.
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 Aye. All those opposed, say nay. Okay, unanimously approved. Wonderful. So now we move on to our first general public comment period, item 5. And I'll pass it over to Kristen.
Thanks. Public comment can be made by phone by calling 877-853-5247 or 888-788-0099 and entering meeting ID 935-8080-1941. Or by using the Zoom web link, and that is a2gov.org/Renters Commission meeting. And if you are calling in, you can press *9 to raise your hand, or if you attend through the web link, you can use the raise hand feature. We'll give it just a moment. And there are no callers or attendees.
Okay, thanks, Kristen. So we'll move on to item 6, which is our business. And we will have public comment on our action items. So tonight that would be, we have a resolution 6-B. And I think that, I'm not sure if there's anything else on there that has public comment, but we will move on to our first piece of business, 6-A, which is a presentation about equitable engagement. So welcome, Heather.
Thank you. I really appreciate you inviting me to attend, or at least allowing me to attend. I think I had asked to be part of this, and I appreciate you allowing me to spend some time with you to talk about our Equitable Engagement Initiative. So I'm going to share my screen. I do have a presentation, and as I'm doing that, just to give you a little bit of background about myself, my background is in urban planning and social work, which brought me to do this kind of work. I'm now actually over at the Housing Commission. So again, my background in urban planning and social work has brought me to work on affordable housing. But prior to that, I was in a group called Systems Planning at the city and focused on things like long-range planning projects, as well as engagement. So took this up because what I was seeing was just kind of a lot of imbalanced engagement, I guess I'll call it. And so let me get the presentation going and I will share the story of this initiative and the outcomes. So really this all began because we as an entity, as the city government, as well as the community, express a value in having inclusive and equitable community. And we see, those of us who are in the game of engagement really see as equitable engagement as really central to that. And so what we sought to do was to develop a shared understanding of what equity means, so really have that common language, and then develop some policies, guidelines, and practices that could be implemented to help us be the inclusive city that we desire to be. So before we did that, we realized that we needed to get grounded as staff. So we brought staff together, and this was really a multidiscipline and multi-department effort. So we pulled in people from OSI. They were very interested in doing this. People from HR, people from planning. Laura Ortad, who you may have met, became involved once they came on board the city. We had people from public services involved. And so with that, we started off just as an internal team trying to ground ourselves. And we began looking at promising practices from other communities. So what were other places doing that were successful? And then looking at local and regional conditions related to equity. So where do we stand, basically? So we were looking at a bunch of data related to that. And then we also looked at what our current practices were. One of the things that the city has been doing for a long time is using something that's called the Community Engagement Toolkit, which is a method of thinking through a series of questions about who we engage and how do we engage, what are the ways in which we're going to reach out to people, and how are we going to ask the questions, what are the questions that we're asking. However, this engagement toolkit isn't universally applied across the city. So that's something that we needed to dig into. Why were some people using it, some people not? To some people, it felt cumbersome. Other people, it seemed to take a lot of time, and so didn't bother with it. So trying to figure out what the ups and downs were with that toolkit. We also looked at demographic data, and I'll talk about that in a little bit more, at least show you the data. And we began collecting this back in 2019, so right before the pandemic. And with that, we wanted to get an understanding of who we were reaching so we can determine ways to broaden our efforts. We also started doing staff training on engagement best practices. So there's an international group called the International Association of Public Participation, IAP2, that does training specifically on engagement. And so we invited them to come start working with staff. Again, this was right before the pandemic, so those trainings ended up getting shut down, but we're starting to revive them. And this was really just to help all staff gain a higher comfort level with engagement, as well as understand methodology a little bit better. We also looked at what we've done in the past with youth, and there's been a number of things that the city has done throughout the decades reaching out to youth. But one of the more recent efforts was holding a class with Central High School, Community High School, and inviting youth over to come into City Hall to help them learn about how the city operates and to really impress upon them that they have a role to play in making decisions that will affect them as adults in the future, assuming that they'll stay in the community. And then we also looked at our public participation requirement for developers, which is a little bit above and beyond what other communities do, but just really started examining how is it working? Is it effective? Are there things that we wanted to change about that? So this is the demographic data. And as you can see on here, we've compared this against census data. So how do we compare, with people who are coming to our meetings and taking our surveys? Again, some of this is from right before the pandemic. So we had physical meetings. A lot of it was confined to just online meetings and online surveys. But as you can see, basically the people that are participating with us are primarily white, wealthy homeowners that are older in age. We knew this, this was our assumption. That's what we were sensing at our meetings, and this data verifies that. So thus the steering committee was born, and what we wanted to do was not get the usual suspects. So not the same people that were coming to our meetings already and our events already, but really reaching out. And so we did a strong effort with trying to reach, again, the not so usual suspects. We did some of our standard stuff by going through our social media. So Twitter, Nextdoor, Facebook are kind of the big three that the city uses. We also did a press release. We put out flyers, which seems kind of old fashioned, but really we're going back to doing things like that, because what that does is it captures people that are just passing by. So not people that are already on our listservs, and that's part of the problem, is we just kind of keep reaching out to the same people that have already signed up to be part of our system. So flyers helps us get to new people. We also sent out flyers through Meals on Wheels, which is not something that we've traditionally done, and we're starting to do more and more. We put it in a community newsletter. We did do email distribution. We also sent a flyer out through schools, so inviting both youth and parents to be involved in this. And then we put together a PSA that was on CTN, which I don't know that very many people saw, but it was just another means to get something out there, which we don't typically do. With that, we got 80 applicants, so that was more than I had anticipated. So it really shows that there's kind of a craving for this. There's a lot of people out there that really want to talk about this. We felt that that would be too big for a steering committee. So we made a tough decision to narrow it down to 30 people, which is still a big steering committee, but we just didn't want to narrow it down any further. So one of the first tasks that the steering committee did was define equity. So what do we mean by equity? And this is the definition that they came up with. Equity is the fair and just practices that ensure all community members can thrive. Equitable practices acknowledge and address structural inequities, historic and current, that advantage some and disadvantage others. And this is distinguished from equality, which is treating everyone as if their experiences are the exact same. The topics that we covered during our steering committees, which took the course of over about a year and a half, are these. And I have to say, I started off with this very linear path in mind. I had all of the meetings planned out in my head, and this, this project plan, this neat, tidy project plan, and we deviated from it quite a bit, because what I learned early on is that we really needed to really talk about the things that were meaningful to people. And we couldn't just talk about engagement, which is what I had kind of sought out to do. We had to talk about all of these other topics too, everything that relates to equity. You have to address that when you start talking about engagement as it relates to equity. So where we began was talking about the Opportunity Index, which is something that the county has put out there. If you haven't seen it, I really encourage you to go look at that. So the opportunity maps areas in the county that have more opportunity than others, and it's based on a variety of criteria, which the website explains. So again, if you haven't had a chance to look at that, I do encourage you to take a look. We also reviewed demographic data. That's the data that I just showed you, and dug into that a little bit more and talked about why that was. Why are we only getting white, wealthy, older homeowners coming to our events? We did talk about the engagement toolkit and kind of picked it apart, what seemed to work well and what doesn't work well. We also reflected on engagement efforts that were in process at the time. So one of those engagement efforts was the American Rescue Plan Act funding, which several members of the committee felt we could have done a better job at. So we looked at that. And then some members got really involved with the water treatment plant project, which is an effort to examine how we were going to restore and rebuild our water treatment plant. So some members got involved in that. Other members got involved with other projects as well. So some people are participating in some of the transportation implementation that we're doing. One person got involved with our forestry management plan process. So the influence started spreading a little bit as we were going through this process. We also talked about land use planning. This is so key as a planner, I think this, but we really needed to examine our history about where we are now in the history of segregation and the government's role in that. So we talked about that. And Brett Leonard from the planning department came and spoke on that. Affordable housing. So Jennifer Hall came and talked about that. We also looked a lot at city hiring practices. So at the time the committee started, an article came out that talked about how the city's upper level staff members were mostly white men. And so people really wanted to talk about that. So we dug into that quite a bit. And we had a number of people from HR that came and talked about that. We looked at sustainability efforts. And then, of course, we looked at the building blocks of meaningful engagement. We also did some field trips. So this is one of the field trips to the water treatment plant that we did. This is something that the group came up with. We actually didn't end up putting this in the report, but I really like it, so I wanted to show it to you. It's this visual that we have of a paw, which brings together these topics that people really wanted to focus on. So housing, accessibility, city hiring, and leadership practices, and how engagement, if done right, really can influence the toes. So if you're really grounded in the main pad of the foot, you'll set the direction of where the paw is walking and kind of, put it on good ground. So that really brings me up to the recommendations that the group came up with, which I want to read to you. And I do encourage you, and Kristen, you'll have to let me know if we have not actually sent you a draft of the report yet. I'll make sure that you get it, because the report gives a much fuller detail about the story of how we got to these recommendations. And then it also, on some of the recommendations, there's some strategies, or sorry, not just strategies, but some action steps involved. So I do encourage you to go look at more of the detail. But the first recommendation is to demonstrate that the city is committed to advancing equity. And the reason behind this is that people who have been minoritized and marginalized will not engage with the city if the city is not representative or clearly committed to supporting equity. So under that, we have that the city intentionally hires minoritized individuals, especially in higher level positions. The next one is to create transparent and meaningful pathways for promotion of minoritized individuals. After that, we have appoint racially and ethnically minoritized candidates representing impacted community perspectives to boards and commissions. And then after that, City Council adopts and enforces policies that help ensure decision-making is equitable. And in the report, there are actually some possible policy statements. Ultimately, we do want to take this to City Council and have them consider adopting those policy statements, as well as thinking about how we can advance these recommendations and put budget behind it. The next strategy is to be authentic. And I know that seems really general, but this goes back to the idea of that we need to come to the table and be really sincere. So ask the questions that we mean to ask. Don't use complicated language. Share information. Just be really direct about everything. And then finally, build trust and transparency through continuous outreach and relationship building. So it's not necessarily enough that we have meetings in response to projects that are going on, but we need to have a continuous relationship building effort. So the next recommendation is to provide both ample and targeted invitations to engagement opportunities. And the purpose behind this is that people need to be made aware of opportunities in addition to feeling welcome and valued at engagement events. So this is really important. So it's not enough for us just to make a better effort of getting notices out, but once people get there, we need to really make it worthwhile for them to be there. So make their input really mean something, and to, of course, avoid having arenas where things feel hostile and meaningless. So under this, we have the strategy to translate and transcreate. And transcreate means adapting a message from one language to another while maintaining its intent, style, tone, and context on meeting notices and content. And our intention is to work with the most commonly spoken languages first, but then expand from there. The next strategy is, in addition to social media and email, use non-digital ways to get the word out, such as flyers. As I mentioned before, we're seeing that that's more effective. Word of mouth. So again, that's another really effective way because it's coming from people who are trustworthy typically. Door hangers and other methods like that, including posting at community hubs, such as community centers, libraries, and schools. The next strategy is to get the word out through places like religious institutions, barbershops, bus stops, and informal networks. And then after that, actively recruit Black, Indigenous, and people of color to participate in engagement events. And then finally, create an online engagement hub that is easy to find and use. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment because that's something that's already moving forward. Recommendation 3 is to develop community engagement plans with care. And the purpose behind this is that engagement plans are the blueprint for ensuring quality, equitable engagement. So with this, we have one main strategy, which is to provide the resources necessary for staff to conduct meaningful engagement. So that involves ensuring a budget is available for community engagement events. Oftentimes in the past, community engagement was tacked on to a project. And what we're calling for is to make it central to a project and to really have some robust resources behind it, such as being able to pay for food, you know, if we're expecting people to come between work and other things that they need to be doing in life. So provide food or even pay people to attend, really honor people's time. And also to continue to increase staff training and conduct quality engagement, continue to use and evolve the city's community engagement toolkit, and then create suitable measurements and milestones for successful engagement. So that's us always checking back in on ourselves, like what's working, and recognizing that this is always evolving and that we need to keep up with it. We can't stay static. And then finally, the last recommendation is to make engagement events more accessible and attractive. And the purpose behind this is that engagement events that are not easy to access, seem unimportant, or feel hostile deter people from engaging. So with that, we want to offer hybrid meeting options. What we did find during the pandemic is that we were getting to some extent, a broader scope of people coming to meetings, because online really offers some opportunities for people who are not interested or not able to come to City Hall all the time, or the other locations that we typically have meetings. You can be at home and have your kids running around. You can be in your pajamas, or you can eat your dinner. So we want to continue to offer these online opportunities and also have in-person opportunities. So looking for ways to have effective hybrid meeting options. We also want to provide various ways for people to provide their input, avoid ways that allow for dominant people and narratives for taking over the meetings. Hold meetings at various times. So in the past, we typically have them in the evening, which is useful for people that have a traditional work schedule, but many people do not. So looking at various times. And again, over the pandemic, we found that if you're doing something online, a variety of times, such as lunchtime or even early in the morning, it can really bring more people out. Record meetings. This is another thing that we've learned about online life with engagement, is that people really appreciate recordings of the meetings. That allows people to go back and actually hear things verbatim instead of relying on notes. So I personally like them too. Holding people to the golden rule standard. I know this seems, maybe kind of basic, but really just, hold people to treating other people like how we want to be treated. So with that, we are working, we try to enforce ground rules now at every meeting. So listing out ground rules and enforcing those, and just really trying to encourage and enforce people to be respectful to others. And this is the same recommendation continued. We also want to recognize that the community's time and energy is valuable, especially for people with limited resources. So again, trying to find ways to compensate people, such as with food stipends, gift certificates. The next one is to hire trained and continue to train meeting facilitators and moderators in fields such as social work, psychology, diversity, equity, inclusion, public participation. So we can really have skilled people out there. The next one is to create space to listen and heal old wounds using highly trained engagement facilitators. So not ignoring kind of the ills of the past, but really acknowledging, that things haven't always been perfect. Also creating, and the next one is taking time to celebrate and experience joy as a community. So we don't really do that enough. We often have meetings where people are responding in anger to something, but we also have a lot of successes, and we need to come together and bond as a community more, not just with complaining about things, but actually experiencing joy and looking at things that have gone well. And then finally, when a decision is being made, clearly communicate what that decision is, the decision-making process, who ultimately makes the decision, and the level of influence that the community can have over the decision. So that is something that needs to be spoken at the beginning of a process. And then also we need to make sure that we circle back at the end of the process, which we haven't always been good about, and saying, okay, this was the decision that was made, and this is why it was made, and this is what your input did to influence that decision. So going back to promising practices, this is something that I mentioned that staff had researched earlier. Here are some highlights of that we seem to be moving forward with, that are based on the recommendations too. So creating a system of community liaisons. So these are people that will probably pay, or we're hoping to get the budget to pay for community liaisons. This will likely be an extension of the Equitable Engagement Steering Committee and the networks that have come out of that steering committee. So what we're hoping is to get people that are involved in our projects going forward. We also want to measure participant satisfaction. So we've developed some polls and surveys just to continuously check in where we're at, how we're doing. Continuing to do a mix of meeting styles. Again, we've been confined by Zoom for a number of years, but we're starting to get back more in person. What we want to avoid is the typical town hall meetings where it is just one person, going up to the podium one at a time, where people can really dominate a situation and set the tone for a situation, but doing things more like charrettes and open houses and having things more interesting. One of the things that has been rattling around my brain is having storytelling sessions and doing games like tabletop games and doing problem solving that way. So those are just things that are seedlings, but we hope to evolve those. We've also talked about information kiosks. So one of the lessons that we learn over and over again is that we can't expect people to come to us. We really need to get out to people. And this might be a way to do it, is having kiosks set throughout the city, not just in the downtown, but really throughout the entire city on the outskirts. And with these kiosks, we can share information. We can also probably do digital polls, things like that. So we're looking into that technology. Continue to do more surveys and polls. I worry about us kind of oversaturating that, but right now people seem to really like taking our surveys. I think because it's fairly easy. You can do it on your phone. You can find it online and do a survey from your home. So we'll continue to do that. And then the engagement hub. So this is an example of an engagement hub. This is from Pittsburgh. What we have right now is just kind of a listing of ways to engage with the city. So our page isn't very dynamic. And we want to move towards something more like this. The research behind this came about from a group of U of M students that we worked with during the process from the School of Information. So they looked at our current website, who was using it, and then looked at these best practices from other communities. And this is just one of the examples, but you can see it's more visual than what we have right now. What's up here is what they call cards. So it gives an image of what the project is, or what the topic is, and then a description, and then you can click to learn more. And this will be continuously updated. You can also do searches on here if there's a particular topic that you're interested in. But we really want to have something that's soup to nuts, basically, with all engagement opportunities, instead of trying to hunt through the entire city website to look for the topic. Or if you just want to be an engaged citizen, you can go to this one-stop shop and say, okay, what's happening now? What do I want to get engaged in? And just kind of look around. And then finally, this is going back to the idea that we need to celebrate more. So we've closed out meeting regularly as a steering committee, and our final event was getting together to do this potluck. And I think you'll recognize one of your own commission members, Dan is part of the committee, who made the best dumplings I've ever had in my life, and I'm still dreaming about them. So this was a really nice event because all of our meetings were online. So this is the first time we had come together physically. So it was nice to talk to each other and actually bond a little bit more. So I went through that very quickly. I'm happy to give more detail or answer any questions. You can also go to this website right here. I'm sorry, this is an email. If you do have any comments that you want to provide, if you have a chance to read through the report and just want to give more thought to it, it's still in draft form. We'll be finalizing it in the next couple of months, though. And then you can read more about the Equitable Engagement Initiative on this page. So I'm going to stop sharing so I can see all of you and see if there's any questions or thoughts.
Heather, I just want to thank you. My overall impression of that was it was positive in a world where there's so little in the media that is positive. That was positive and hopeful, and I appreciated the effort and presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Jamie, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much, Heather. That was awesome. I had a couple questions. I was wondering, is the toolkit something that is like ready for public consumption? Is that something that we could access?
It is just on our internal website right now, so it's meant for staff, but that doesn't mean that we can't send you the pieces and parts of it. I'm happy to do that. I mean, there's nothing to really hide about it. And
Okay.
really, like eventually we do want to put it out there, especially for consultants that we're looking to hire, because we do want to require consultants to go through our toolkit so we can have thoughtful engagement, with a consulting team that's hired to do that. So I'm happy to share that with you. What's involved in it, just to give you a little bit more detail of the parts and pieces. So we do have an ever-growing stakeholder list. So one of our hopes is to make sure that we're not inadvertently leaving people out. So we have a stakeholder list that we talk through, like who needs to be at the table. And, some of it is like the standard organizations at the city, like, does the ride need to be here? Does that, but then we just keep growing it. We've recently added churches to it. In the past, there was this idea that we wanted to separate church and state, but we realized we can't really, like we're missing out on a lot of people, and we got to get to those more informal networks and communities and churches are a huge part of that. So they've been added to the list. So that's one part of it. And the other part is a questionnaire, basically, that we're continuing to change all the time, trying to get more at equity questions. But it's basically thinking through what is the decision that we're trying to make, and what is the question that we're asking the community? Because one of the big mistakes that we've made in the past is just coming out and saying, what do you want? When really people don't have influence over anything and everything in a project. It might be something specific. So like a road design, for example, there can be some tweaking of the way a bike lane is designed, but it's not a question of whether the bike lane is going in or not at that point, but that's what people want to talk about, or they want to just redesign the entire road. So we just kind of need to be clear about what we're actually asking. And then to think through that level of influence. So are we going out to just to inform, to tell people about something? Are we trying to, have input over certain topics? So having consultation basically with the community and getting advisement? Or do we actually want to go as far as empowering people? And so putting the decision making in their hands. So thinking through that.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And then my other question was just about the community liaisons. I was wondering if the plan for that is to have people like within specific, like, would you have a community liaison related to housing, or like how would that be set up?
Yeah, we haven't specifically detailed it yet, aside from just the concept of not the usual people, like being representative of groups and people that have not traditionally had a voice, and bringing them more central to the decision-making process. So, and I think probably the first test case of this is going to be our comprehensive plan. I'm not positive about that, but I think that is going to be a component of that, is setting up a team of ambassadors or liaisons, or, whatever we call them, and going through a process of identifying who those people are and bringing them into that effort.
Awesome. Thank you so much again.
Yeah.
Thank you, Heather. And just to clarify, are those liaisons to the steering committee?
For the comprehensive plan, it'll be to that effort itself. The steering committee is basically kind of done right now. Not that it's really done, because there were brands that were formed and some of us pledged to, stay in touch and do things together, but we're not meeting any further. My kind of hope was that that some of the steering committee members would want to come back once we have some sort of ambassador or liaison program set up, that they would want to come back and be those liaisons or ambassadors. But if not, we'll be opening it up to other people being able to participate in that.
That makes sense. Thank you. And I have another question. Well, first of all, I want to say that some of the recommendations in the presentation, I think, are applicable to our outreach to tenants in the city. So thank you for that. And I would like to see some of those, what were they called? The toolbox?
The toolkit.
The toolkit. Yeah, I'm interested to see those. And I have one last question for you, which is how did you gather information on how your applicants found out about the ability to serve on the steering committee?
We did ask that question. Not everybody answered that, but I can go back and see, yeah, and gather that data for you. I don't really remember what the most common point of contact was with that, but I'll go back and see if we can identify that.
Sure. Yeah, I think that since tenants are spread out over the whole city, it would be interesting. And we're not looking for, to hone in on a super niche group.
Mhm.
We want to cast a wide net, and it would be interesting to see how you were able to do that with your steering committee. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, are there any other questions for Heather? Okay, thank you so much. We really appreciate the presentation. And you know where to find us. So please stop by anytime, communicate with the Renters Commission about any events. We definitely like to help in any way we can in increasing engagement with all parts of the city.
Yeah, absolutely. And I encourage you to reach out to me as well. Again, I'm over at the Housing Commission now. I've been there for about a month. So I'm really thinking about the experience of renters and housing conditions. It's heavy on my mind. So please do feel free to reach out to me if we can join forces on anything. And again, if you have any thoughts that come to you later, if you do have time to read the report, or if you just have a question that comes up, please do reach out. I'm happy to talk about this at any point.
Thank you very much, Heather.
Yeah, thank you.
Mhm. All right. Wonderful. Now we've just finished 6-A. I believe, Kristen, we can move on to 6-B. Sound good? Okay, so we should have a public comment session for this since it's an action item, since we might be voting on it. So, Kristen, do you mind leading that?
Sure. If anyone would like to address the Renters Commission on this topic, you can call 877-853-5247 or 888-788-0099 and enter meeting ID 935-8080-1941. Or you can attend using the Zoom link, and that is a2gov.org/Renters Commission meeting. If you are attending with the Zoom link, please use the raise hand feature, or if you are calling, you can press *9. Again, this is an opportunity to address the Renters Commission for up to 3 minutes. If there are any callers or attendees who would like to do so, go ahead and raise your hand now. You have one hand raised. Go ahead and state your name at the beginning of your comment.
Hello, can you hear me? Great. Hi, my name is Rich Fine. I am in Ann Arbor. And just like to review with the commission a study that I've done relating to utility rates on all electric apartments versus mixed fuel apartments. It's my understanding that one of the issues that you're addressing is the fact that some people have claimed that the utility costs for an all-electric apartment are higher than that for mixed fuel, where natural gas is used for heating and water. I had forwarded an analysis of this. I don't know if you can show it right now, if you're able to view it or not. I cannot.
Yeah, we do have that, Kristen. Would that be okay if I share that? I think it's in the communications.
Sure.
Okay.
While you're calling that up, I was wondering this myself, so I decided to do an analysis of this. The analysis was energy analysis was performed with the same tool that the Rocky Mountain Institute uses for the study that you quote in your resolution. What you'll see, this is an analysis of a 1,500 square foot unit in a new 320 unit apartment complex recently approved by the city using natural gas for heat and hot water. According to this analysis, the utility costs for an all-electric apartment are indeed more than for a mixed fuel apartment. You'll see it on the first set of green lines, the first and the second set of the difference of cost is between $240 and $335 per year. This equates to $21 to $28 per month, depending on the unit. I will mention that if the developer were to spend a portion of their savings from building without a gas hookup towards improving the efficiency of the building, the cost difference actually drops to between $6 and $14 per month. There's another line on here. The third green line shows the CO2 savings. And by going with all electric, the savings in the first year per unit is 3,600 to 4,500 pounds of CO2 per year. If you multiply that by the 320 units in this apartment complex, that's now 1.7 million miles of driving a gasoline car per year. And as we improve our fuel mix on electricity over time, switching to fossil-free renewables, the difference will become millions and millions of gasoline miles per year. And that is for this one single apartment complex. No one wants to see expenses go up. Every dollar counts for low-income households, but must we sacrifice our climate for utility costs of this size? I hope you see that the continuation of apartment construction using natural gas is too steep of a price to pay for the amount of dollar savings. I encourage you to vote for the resolution. Thank you.
Have caller ending in 134.
Thank you, Kristen and Chair Farah. My name is Ken Garber, and I'm a renter at 28 Haverhill Court. I'm intrigued by the previous caller, Mr. Fine's analysis. I think finally we're hearing some actual data being brought to this question of utility costs, which I think has been subject to a lot of speculation, exaggeration in previous meetings. I think we have to actually refer to actual data and documented information before making claims that this gas ban ordinance would be bad for tenants. Sounds like the difference in utility costs over the course of a year would be slight. And if landlords took some common sense measures to improve energy efficiency of their buildings, and as a renter in Ann Arbor, I know there's plenty of room to do that. I think that basically it could be a wash or close to it. But I want to raise a few other issues. You may have heard that a 3-judge panel from the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled last week against the Berkeley gas ban ordinance. This is obviously not good news, but it's important not to overstate its implications for Ann Arbor. First, Berkeley has signaled that it does plan to appeal either to the full appeals court or to the Supreme Court. And second, I spoke today with a University of Michigan environmental law professor. He had not yet read the appeals court decision, but Berkeley's ordinance amended that city's building code. Ann Arbor, on the other hand, is proposing to amend its zoning code. And this professor did point out that courts give much greater leeway to localities in general when it comes to zoning, which is considered strictly a local matter, very difficult to preempt at the state or federal level than it does for building codes. So Ann Arbor's situation is different than Berkeley. And so I don't think this court decision, as disheartening as it is, really shuts off Ann Arbor's opportunity to pass an ordinance to ban gas connections in new construction and major renovations, the subject of the resolution tonight. And the resolution does allow for interim measures to be implemented urgently to incentivize electrification or penalize gas in new construction. Other cities are doing this. I just got off the Ann Arbor for Public Power Roundtable discussion. One of the panelists was Darren Springer, General Manager of Burlington Electric. He mentioned that Burlington has implemented a carbon pollution impact fee starting at $150 per metric ton for new construction. That is buildings that install fossil fuel thermal energy systems. And for existing commercial and industrial buildings, 50,000 square feet or larger, when that building is installing fossil fuel space heating as well. So I think Ann Arbor has a lot of different options here as it works through the legal process towards a full gas ban. And so the bottom line is that your resolution tonight is very much relevant to our short-term prospects, especially as every 2 weeks or a month, the city is approving another gas burning project, some of them quite large. And this is just making it absolutely impossible to achieve our 820 carbon neutrality goals. We're falling farther and farther behind. Frankly, the city is failing in this effort in real time. And so in my opinion, this resolution is a no-brainer. And between Mr. Fine's utility cost analysis and the overall urgency of the situation when it comes to Ann Arbor's building boom, I commend you for considering this, and I urge you to pass it tonight and send it on to City Council. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So now we can move on to, let's see. We can move on to discussion of 6-B, resolution in support of an ordinance to ban natural gas connections in new construction and major renovations. I'd like to just walk through a few small changes that have been made to the resolution. Very quickly, it's more or less the same resolution, but what I've changed was I removed a paragraph regarding the health concern implications of natural gas combustion in apartment units, and just added in something very similar. There were some slight inaccuracies in what I had written, and after discussion with an energy commissioner, I changed it to make sure that it was correct. Moving on, there was another slight inaccuracy which was corrected through the discussion with an energy commissioner. And I included a small sentence about the fact that the Energy Commission has already passed a very similar resolution. They did that on April 11th. And I hope that we will join them. And Then there were some wording changes at the end here to make sure that we're delivering this to city council. And our recommendations are for city council and the administrator rather than any other part of the city government, since our role is to give advice to the city council and the administrator. Finally, I know we were concerned, there was concern about the increasing potential increase in utility cost as a result of this. And so, you know, whether or not this gas ban goes forward, I think it's a good idea that the city council considers any sort of policy that, or policies that would decrease the monthly cost of utilities for tenants, and like the electric bill, and namely. So I think the examples I wrote down here were implementing the proposed green rental housing efficiency checklist that was proposed by the Green Rental Housing Task Force, which was created by OSI. I don't think that those recommendations have been implemented, but the city council members can pipe in and correct me if I'm incorrect about that. Rebates for efficient electric appliances like heat pumps, induction stoves, and programmable thermostats as well are some another option. And finally, we had this in here that the resolution be communicated to the Planning Commission. I'm not sure if that's totally necessary, but we put that in there. The recommendation isn't for the Planning Commission, but we wanted the resolution to be, if it's passed, be seen by them. All right, so with that, I think we can open up for quick Q&A and then open up for discussion afterward. Are there any questions? Okay, go ahead. Oh, I saw Bob's hand first and then you put it down.
Sorry, it's up. Just double clicked too quickly.
Okay, well, go ahead, Bob.
What is the definition of major construction? Is there a standard definition of that?
Yeah, I believe that I believe that the definition is any renovation that costs more than 50% of the evaluated cost of the property.
Got it. Okay.
That's my understanding. And
Of the assessed value or the market value?
I think it's the assessed value.
Okay.
I understand it.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Just to point out, that's not that much. A fairly modest kitchen renovation could exceed the value of the half the value of an assessed value. Like 80,000. I know it's terrible amounts of money, but is not unheard of for a kitchen renovation. And assessed values are around 50% of market value for single family homes. So that it sounds like a lot, but it's not that much.
Thanks. Jordan?
Thanks for the changes. I'm glad to see that we are encouraging the city to think carefully about the impact on renters. And in general, I'm supportive of this. I'm really struggling with that 50% though. I mean, even like we called contractors, I talked to them. I said, if we were doing this here, like, is it even possible? And for these old buildings, if we were to do a renovation that's 50% of the value, retrofitting it would literally cost far more than the 50% of the value just for the systems. So I guess I feel like if I didn't speak up for that perspective, I wouldn't be really serving our landlord perspective very well. You know, in general, I'm pretty supportive of these things, but I guess I see that the potential for that 50% of value, unless you are doing a huge demolishing project with a ton of money behind it for people like Robert and I, it would not be possible. Like, you'd put us in a position where it just really wouldn't be possible, for example, to electrify one of our big older buildings, cost-wise. So I'm struggling with that piece, but in general, I support it. And I'm thankful for the changes and considerations and for the people who spoke tonight, but I feel like I have to bring that part up.
I appreciate that, Jordan. Thank you. Jamie.
Yeah, just a quick question, and you might not know the answer to this. Just wondering, would this also apply to, would the university be included in this, or are they exempt? Do they have exemptions from?
It does not include the university. They're a separate entity. So I think that the zoning, they're not affected by zoning
Okay,
in the city level.
okay, thank you.
And thanks to the caller who mentioned the distinction between zoning and the zoning code and the building code. The difference really is important. um, okay, I see Nick is next.
Thanks. I have a question for anybody who has an opinion on it. What are the pros and cons of doing what we can to incentivize alternative energy sources and cheaper sources rather than ban gas? You understand the way I'm putting it? Is there what, have there been communities that have succeeded in this regard? I was really impressed with our speakers. They're both obviously very knowledgeable about this, probably far more than I'll ever be. So I take everything they say as true. I accept that there are many, many benefits to natural gas not being used and alternative forms of energy being used. But can it be done in a way that, as I said, incentivizes alternatives rather than ban gas?
Jordan, did you raise your hand to respond to that? Okay. And Jeff, were you responding to that?
Kind of, yes. In the same vein, I don't know if we can actually get a response from Mr. Fine. I was curious about his carbon offset numbers, as if those were that specifically the building, or does that trace all the way back to the generation of the power itself? And tying into what Mr. Rommel said, maybe adding something or having something about incentivizing renewables, maybe along with this, because of course, if the carbon offset is just going to the power plant versus burning in houses, what is the advantage to that? And I did some number of research myself, and from DTE's own numbers, almost 60% of their electricity supply is still from coal. It's like 57% from their own release numbers, which is I think 20% higher than the regional average. So kind of tying into that, a multi-pronged approach, I guess, to this idea.
Yeah, well, I'd like to respond to that. Thank you, Jeff. So when Mr. Fine contacted me asking to include his analysis on our agenda today, I think he contacted me yesterday. We did speak about that question of, is this really going to be decreasing emissions if we're just switching from natural gas in the home to coal and natural gas somewhere else? And he did consider that in his analysis. He did consider the fuel mix, and it still resulted in a reduction in emissions. And I think the reason why is because in your home, you are using natural gas on a much smaller scale, which is much less efficient than it is in a large power plant, even though there is a difference between natural gas and coal. So overall, it still would result in emissions reductions, and those emissions reductions would likely get only larger as DTE shifts away from coal towards natural gas and slightly towards maybe more renewables. I'm not crazy about where they are right now or where they're going to be in the next 10 years. However, it is going to get a bit cleaner. And my understanding from one of our commenters, I think it was Mr. Ken Garber, this would likely be challenged in the courts, and would a natural gas ban for new constructions wouldn't be implemented for some time. So I think the idea was the city council would have time to implement some kind of incentive-based system in the short term while this is being potentially implemented after some kind of court case. That was my understanding, but again, the city council members who know this better can chime in.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, well, comments, we can open up for any sort of discussion here. Okay. Kristen.
I just wanted to quickly kind of recap last month at the meeting. This was moved and seconded and then postponed to this meeting. So this amended version hasn't been, you're kind of learning about these amendments, and then you could move and second to approve the amendments. And then after those are approved, you'll vote on the main resolution as amended. So you'll need to move in a second and the vote, and then a vote after that.
Gotcha. So I do share the concern from Jordan and Bob. Oh, I guess I'm not sure that you expressly said this, Bob, but about the major renovations part and about how that may not be practical. I'm not really prepared to say that it definitely would be practical. So if you all have any comments on that, and what if you think that there should be amendments regarding that, I'd be open to discussing those. But I see Nick.
Yeah, I just again, real quick, please remind me procedurally, is this a recommendation to city council, or is this a standalone resolution on our part that is mainly symbolic in value, I guess?
It is a resolution that includes the recommendation to city council. It is symbolic. It doesn't have teeth to it. We're not banning gas. It's up to city council, and if they were to consider this at the council level, there would be public comment from anybody.
Well, let me ask, if I may, council members, Radine and Harrison, to what extent do you think council might make a difference in consideration of this issue should we pass the resolution?
I'm going to give you a very unsatisfactory answer, but it's very similar to my. I abstained from this conversation at the Energy Commission, and so I am not going to be able to give you an answer to that here either. We're in the middle of ongoing conversations with city staff and legal staff, and exploring multiple paths forward. So I can't really say much more than that at this point.
Okay. Ms. Harrison?
Same. That's
okay. That's fair.
Bob?
Just to be clear, I am supportive of this. I just want to be careful to point out unintended consequences, because as Jordan says, if these costs kind of go in a direction that is uneconomic, then it's just not I appreciate the cost analysis for a new construction, and I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think the new construction techniques that are required, that are effectively very different, make this feasible and a good idea. On an old building, it can certainly be done. I'm certainly working on that on our own house, which is an old building, acknowledging that it doesn't have the envelope, and so it may be uneconomic. I'm still going to do it, but it's going to be uneconomic. So that's just, the renovation thing might have unintended consequences. I'll let others who maybe have better information than me speak on that.
Gotcha. Thank you. Anyone else?
Can I go quickly? I just wanted to, if they're still here, say thanks to the people who called in. It's really useful and informative, especially to see some data on the utility stuff, because we had talked about that last week. I thought that was really useful. Strongly in support of this. I think it's great. Really appreciate the people who put it together. And I think we should be working on more projects that connect climate policy with affordable housing policy. I think this is great.
Thanks, Lucy. Jeff?
I also want to thank our speakers. They answered quite a few of the questions that I myself had at the last meeting. I do support, I've supported in general, but I feel much more comfortable with having some of this analysis going forward.
Thank you, Jeff. I actually made a mistake earlier. I said 50% of the appraised value. And there was, that's not actually correct. I was just looking it up from the draft ordinance proposed by Planning Commission staff. Includes, let me see. They mention any renovation where the cost of renovation exceeds 75% of the appraised value of the entire building or structure. So that does sort of change it, especially if you have a multi-unit structure. And then they also say any addition or cumulative addition in any 5-year period that result in an increase in floor area of 50% or more. So it's a very major change. Bob?
That's a lot more reasonable. That makes a lot more sense. Agreed.
Thank you.
I
Yeah,
agree. Thanks.
yeah, and I apologize for that mistake. I must have mixed up the numbers. I know that there was a lot of thought put into exactly what the recommendations were, and even if you still are unsure about that, and if we do vote on this tonight, and I hope that we will, and you disagree with certain aspects of it, you can always advocate for a different position to City Council directly if this is seen by City Council. Okay, anything else before we move forward? Okay, I will motion to make the amendments to amend the resolution in the ways that I showed. Do we have a second for making those amendments?
Second.
Thank you, Jeff. All those in favor of amending the resolution, say aye.
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 Aye. All those opposed, say nay. Okay, the resolution is amended unanimously. And do we automatically move on to voting, Kristen?
Yeah, you can hold some discussion. So now you are voting on the main
okay.
resolution as amended. If you want to do any discussion about that before holding a vote, you can.
Right. So now that we're discussing the officially amended proposed resolution, is there any other discussion?
Shouldn't we have a motion to approve the resolution as amended and a second before we discuss?
I think
Because I thought the previous motion was to just amend the resolution.
So now we have the amended draft resolution in front of us, and we can discuss it, the entire resolution as we were kind of blended the two discussion sections, so apologies. But if there's anything else to be added about the resolution, now would be the chance before we actually vote on it. Okay, going once. All right, now we can move into voting. Right, Kristen?
Yeah.
Great. Okay, all those in favor of passing the resolution before us, say aye.
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 Aye. And all those opposed, say nay.
Nay.
Okay. So the ayes have it. One no vote. Right. So this resolution is passed and will be sent to City Council, the Administrator, and Planning Commission. Thank you, everyone, for the debate. I know this is probably outside of the comfort area for a lot of people, but I really do appreciate everyone who thought about it carefully. Okay. So now we move on to 6-C, discussion of remedies relating to the apartment waitlist issue, informed by waitlist report. Right. So let me open this up. The draft report of the about waitlists for rental units in Ann Arbor was finished by our working group. My understanding is it was sent to city attorneys. Kristen, has that happened yet?
I did send it, but I haven't received any like memo or comments on it.
Okay.
Were you looking specifically for like a response from the attorney's office on like just like general comments, or like is what we're suggesting legal?
Yeah, I suppose. I think that had come up earlier. Just we want to make sure that we're not misspeaking, saying anything that's untrue. And if they do have any thoughts about the legality of the proposed remedies, that would be helpful before it's sent off to City Council.
Okay.
Okay, so I would encourage you all to read through the report if you haven't already. It's the same report we've seen a few times, but it's finished, we think. It has more information in the background regarding we implemented some survey data from central student government that does just pertain to student tenants, but I think is useful nonetheless. We included more information about, let's see, there was I think an improved discussion of waitlist fees versus application fees, which is pretty confusing since there's not a strict definition of the two in the state of Michigan. And then there was some discussion of relevant policies in other cities and other jurisdictions. So actually, we probably should change that to make sure it's not just cities, states and cities. Thank you to Lucy for doing a lot of the research. And then recommendations. These were the two recommendations that we came up with. And I can read them here. The first recommendation is that City Council should prohibit landlords from charging any pre-tenancy fees besides the security deposit. That would include application fees, move-in fees, no hassle fees, option fees, etc. We don't have exact language that would be for an ordinance for that, but we think that this is the goal that we want to suggest to the City Council. And then the second recommendation is that City Council should consider amending the early leasing ordinance to more clearly provide that a landlord shall not offer a lease to a tenant before the appropriate date. What that means is landlords, the way that it currently works is with the early leasing ordinance 8530 in the housing code, landlords aren't supposed to require tenants to I'm sorry, I don't have the language right in front of me. They're not allowed to. So what they're currently doing, what some landlords are currently doing, is they're having tenants sign a contract, but the landlords aren't countersigning it to try to circumvent the law. And we think that the language around 8530 should be amended to make sure that that practice is clearly prohibited. We read through it a few times and we think that it's not totally clear. We think it might still currently be illegal, but we're not sure. So maybe the language should be clarified. Okay, Jordan.
Yeah, good thoughts there. And I'm really grateful that this report is out. As you know, and as you and I have talked about, Zachariah, we really don't charge any fees ahead other than security deposit. We try to be as transparent as we can in what a total lease is going to cost our tenants for the year. I think that feels really important. So thanks for this report and that. And I think that is really important. So there's lots of different situations that are happening, right? There's the wait list option in which you might have a chance at that apartment. There is the situation where landlords are having tenants sign and they think they have a signed lease, but it was never countersigned. And so then the landlord backs out and says, oh, we didn't actually have a signed lease. And the tenants are stuck in March without a lease. That has happened almost 10 times to my knowledge that I've heard from parents in the last couple of weeks. So clarifying that, but I think also clarifying that just the idea that a lease, I guess I wonder if this bullet point is enough. So for example, we're seeing, not that I want to put the blame on the tenant, it's surely not their fault that this is happening, but no party may sign a lease. And that a lease, like almost, I'm trying to think of a way to specify for tenants, like that no lease that is not signed by, like a lease must be signed by both parties. To how do we kind of, is there a way to incorporate a little bit of a tenant education piece in this blurb, I guess is maybe the impetus for my question. Does that make sense? Like, is there a way to say that the idea that a countersigned lease isn't legally, or a not countersigned lease isn't legally binding seem to be a lot of the unclearness, both on terms of tenants, parents, like all of that. So wondering if there's a way to be even more specific about what this situation looks like. I don't know. Maybe somebody else reads it and gets an idea from what I'm saying.
Thank you, Jordan. I think I do understand that no party should sign a lease is fair, and maybe clearer. Gail?
Well, I think the issue too that you're trying to get at here is what the early leasing ordinance talks about is that a landlord may not enter into an agreement to rent the leased premises, before until 150 days before the end of the lease. And what that means exactly, does that mean, what does it mean to enter into an agreement? Is it just a signed lease? Is it offering a lease to somebody else? So a little more clarity and understanding about the language within the ELO, I think is maybe what Jordan's talking about too. So, and I'm, as you know, fully supportive of eliminating what you call the junk fees. I mean, I've been seeing over the last, however many years, just a continual increase in additional fees that are really meaningless. And, like you mentioned, administrative fees, move-in fees, no hassle fees, all sorts of additional fees that have made it really hard for tenants to have a true sense of what their actual cost will be in the lease. And so simply eliminating those fees would be incredible and save it, make it more clear for tenants and save money as well. So I, as fully support that.
Thanks, Gail. And I'm guessing that some landlords will likely say that if you eliminate these fees, then the cost of rent will increase. And they may choose to increase the cost of rent, which of course is not good. And maybe they'll even increase it more than the fees cost. There's nothing stopping them from doing that, unfortunately. But at the very least, tenants would know what they're going to be paying. And I think that's getting to your point there, Gail.
Agreed. I mean, I think it's a runaround to increasing the rent. So it makes it seem slightly more affordable for tenants than it really is. Because if you're paying, $1,000 or more in fees, you're paying it a higher rent than you're realizing. So I think it would be helpful to, if you want someone to pay more rent, be clear about what that is. I realize that's not an ideal solution, and the rental costs in Ann Arbor are getting pretty out of control. So we'll see.
Gotcha. Thank you, Gail. Jeff.
I just wanted to clarify what Jordan had said. So is my understanding correct that landlords are circumventing the ELO by suggesting that people sign before the 150 days and then using this technicality of, well, since we haven't signed it, it's not violating the ELO? Is that?
Yeah, both. From my John's got his hand up too, so we could today right now looking for housing for fall of next school year, 2024, 2025. And that's because there are other landlords who are allowing people to put their names on wait lists or pay a holding fee. But what the biggest problem, and this is what the report speaks to, so give that a gander if you haven't, is the biggest problem with that is there's no guarantee, right? These students could pay, say for a group house, a $5,000 holding fee, and they have no guarantee that they're going to get that house. It's now totally illegal to even be asking current tenants if they plan to renew, right? We have right to renew now too. So it's not even legal for a landlord to be bugging current tenants about renewal. And I mean, let's face it, these tenants hadn't even moved in most cases. So they're signing wait lists, they're doing this holding fee, but it's unclear to the tenants. If you signed a wait list, most tenants aren't told if they're going to be guaranteed a house or if there's a chance that people could renew or where they are on that wait list. I mean, in theory, a landlord could have 10 people on a wait list for one house, knowing full well that 9 or 10 are not going to get it. But then the other thing is the uncountersigned lease. So I would think, I mean, Gail can share her experiences and has in the report, but I'm seeing both of those situations. And yeah.
Thank you. John?
So Jeff, current tenants can sign as early as they want, and sometimes that's part of the problem because landlords will send out that renew letter in week 1 to say, hey, re-up now to lock in next year's rates early. So that's not against the rules and the ordinance. And the ordinance was created with allowing existing tenants to lock in early to renew early. So that's not a problem. It's to other tenants, prospective tenants, and then the wait list come in. So early renewals for existing tenants is fine. And I know that might not have been the context of your question, but that's something. It's the other things, what landlords do to get around. I can't rent to somebody or enter into an agreement to rent to somebody until the magic number, we'll say it's 150 days or from the end of the lease. It's what do they do to get around that through a wait list, through a reservation, through some other artifice that's not entering into an agreement to lease. That has been the disappointment. We're going to see what the right to renew does now that tenants will have that right to renew and whether that impacts it for leases entered into or negotiated after October 16th.
Just to build off of that, John, thank you. I think it will be up to the tenants to try to challenge that practice if they see fit of the sort of rent increases the longer you wait to renew. So yeah, you still have priority as a tenant if you're a current tenant with right to renew, but the cost is going to steadily increase. A tenant may choose to challenge that in court, claiming that that's not good faith negotiation. That's up to them, and we'll see what happens now that the law is in place. Nick.
Yeah, I totally agree with what you just said, Zachariah. It's trying to close the loophole with additional amendments. To me, it's analogous to the game of whack-a-mole. You tie up one loophole and another one pops up, and they skirt the language of the ordinance already. As you point out, it may not be a good faith offer if you're charging a fee to get around it or something. So I think that's what's going to have to happen. I agree with Jordan. The vast majority of landlords are totally cool, but there are some, and we know who they are, who are really trying hard to get around this too. And tenant education is a great concept, but there's way too many people shopping for units when they're not even in town, when they're not, checking the right websites yet. They're just desperate to find a place. They're not necessarily going to be reached by tenant education efforts. So, I think that until they're stopped in court, the bad landlords are going to be, I won't say bad, that's maybe too pejorative, but the landlords who want to get around this are going to push it.
Thanks, Nick. Jordan?
Yeah, I guess I think more people are getting around this than not. I want to be very clear that I think this is a huge problem. I don't think it's a handful of landlords that are jumping the gun. I think it's the vast majority, and the fact that I'm getting 20 emails a day begging for housing, I guess, also confirms to me that there are enough people that are at least giving some semblance of you'll have a chance at a house, whether via fee or not. I haven't heard this year how students are securing houses, but obviously some are, or we wouldn't be getting emails. I mean, that is a pretty confirmatory situation. So I think we have to be clear that this is a lot of landlords. We're talking large numbers of people who are taking these kind of waitlist deposits and who are working around. And I mean, I remember, John, when I talked to you 2 years ago, you said, oh, we have it covered. We can't do waitlists. It says any agreement to lease. And then somehow, that seemed to kind of morph into, well, a waitlist or a holding fee isn't an agreement to lease. And somehow we've gotten away from that. And so I don't necessarily, I hear your point, Nick, about it being whack-a-mole. I guess I'm too much of an optimist that there is something that we can do to make this better for students, and that we have to try. That is our duty and charge as the Renters Commission. And I say students just for those who are non-students and not in that world on the call. I think it is important to make some distinctions. I say students because largely, the average person is not looking for a place to live for fall of 2024. So this is kind of unique to the student market here. It's not something that is, so sure, couldn't be exclusively students, but I think most of us would probably agree that it is. So I guess just to say that this is a really big problem and it's affecting students, and it's creating even more inequity, because the students that can afford to pay these huge fees and that can afford to lose $4,000 because they don't get a house are plentiful here in Ann Arbor. And so are the students that have $0 to pay until they absolutely have to pay a deposit at the last point, at the last minute. Those are also plentiful. And so somehow we have to try, and you're right, it might be a game of whack-a-mole, but I think we owe it to students to keep playing.
It's a nice way to put it. I wish this game were more fun, I have to say. But I just wanted to say there's I think two slight changes that I'd like to make. Number one, I think that we might want to say that this is a report on wait lists and pre-tenancy fees for rental units in Ann Arbor. And there's a slight change where I mentioned relevant policies in other cities. It probably should be in other jurisdictions. There's the two changes that I know should be made. Other than that, I think the report is pretty solid. And I think that it does, although the waitlist problem affects predominantly students, the application fee problem affects everybody. And there have been a couple really great reports that came out. One from HUD, one from I can't remember. I think they're listed in the report, some of them, but there is actually more than that. We met with Washington Housing Alliance actually to discuss this, and they pointed out some really great memos and reports about how damaging these application fees are and how the harm is concentrated on certain demographics, people who don't have good credit, people who have a criminal background. I know they're not supposed to be doing criminal background checks in the city of Ann Arbor for rental units, but there's ways around that, and they don't always follow that rule, so that's problematic. And so if you have to submit more applications, if you belong to a demographic where you have to submit more applications, you pay a lot more money. So the burden is placed on smaller groups of smaller demographics within the city. It's not just in students. So I'm interested to hear what you all think about, what the next step should be with this report. Do you think that we should wait to get feedback from attorneys or from our city attorneys, or should we make those slight changes and then provide it to city council? I'm open to any suggestions, but I see Lucy's hand up.
Yeah, I think the recommendations are good. They make sense to me. I think I somewhat disagree with Nick's analysis about that there's always going to be loopholes. To my mind, the real issue that has emerged from this process, ELO, right to renew, and the failure of these ordinances to make a difference is a function of the city's failure to enforce rental rights. And so maybe in that sense, I agree with part of what Nick said, which is that we have to litigate this somewhere else, come up with some stronger rulings, and we really need the city to make moves on rental enforcement. So I think part of our report should be to say that we've been trying to raise this issue on the commission level in multiple forums. We're not seeing a lot of, I'm not seeing a path forward in terms of enforcement of rental rights by the city. And so I think if we pass these amendments, I think they're good. I think they make sense. I think we can expect the city not to enforce them. That's what we've seen so far. So I think we should add something like that to the report. Whether we should give it to the city I think we should give it to the city for review. We should let the city councils see it, just so that more of that the whole council has an idea of what's going on. But do I think making the amendments is going to solve the problem? No, I think the problem is much deeper than that. We have a big problem in this city with rental rights and enforcing them.
I do think that, especially with the discussion with rental housing services, the lack of a clear enforcement mechanism for some of the rental laws is a clear problem. So I think that is a larger issue, definitely. I am leaning towards just providing this report to city council as soon as possible. So long as there's no objections. Well, I suppose if there's any specific amendments that you all want to make to the report, we should discuss those first. But hopefully, I'd like to just see if we can agree on the report and send it on to city council so they can start reading it. There may be some slight issues with it. I don't think that there are any, but I think they need to see this information. I think we've been sitting on the report for a little too long. Jamie.
Yeah, I think Lucy brings up a really good point. And I don't know if this would be like outside the scope of the report. But I'm wondering if a potential tweak, and like this would likely be a long shot, but like a rent stabilization suggestion, to kind of offset maybe where we were saying landlords might be trying to hike up prices, you know, if they had to lose out on some of these junk fees. And again, have no idea if that would be even in the realm of possibility, but I just thought I would throw that out there as an idea.
I know there's increasing talks about some sort of rent stabilization rules, but unfortunately, the state government preempts that for municipal governments. So the city of Ann Arbor couldn't pass any law like that. However, I know that the city's lobbyist was tasked with promoting the idea of repealing that preemption, which would allow the local governments to have control over regulating rent if they wanted to.
Is it, because I know rent control is a no-go from the state, but because rent stabilization is different, is that also not legal?
It's considered, yeah. So the law just says no city can regulate the cost of rent, and that would include rent stabilization.
Okay, gotcha.
Lucy?
I just wanted to add on really quickly to that there are many tenants activists in the city and the state working on getting that law repealed. And secondly, as the Renters Commission, something that we could consider doing is passing a resolution saying that we encourage the city of Ann Arbor to immediately pass rent control as soon as that ban is repealed. I would encourage us to do that.
Jeff? Oh, Jeff, I see your hands up.
Oh, yes, thank you. And on top of that, it's great the city is lobbying for that. You know, would it be appropriate for us as a commission to send a resolution to the state as well?
Good question. I think that since our scope is to provide suggestions directly to city council and the administrator, I think that would be outside of the scope. However, any recommendation to city council, could be shared with the state government and state legislators, and I think that they would be interested in it. Yeah. Okay, Travis.
And I was going to just follow up on Jeff's comment there that the repeal of the rent control language at the state level is part of the city's official policy agenda, and you as a body are a part of the city, and so in that respect, it already kind of is your policy as well through us, and we definitely added it to our list of. When Cynthia and I and other council members met with our legislative delegation at the beginning of this year, it was one of the topics that we pulled directly from that to highlight that it was a priority for us.
Thanks, Travis. Okay, so I made those two changes to the report that I mentioned. Rate lists and pre-tenancy fees for rental units in Ann Arbor, a report produced by the waitlist working group. Like that. And then the other change was on relevant policies in other jurisdictions. I know there was discussion, Jordan, about this recommendation here. Did you end up thinking of a concrete way to change the wording here that you
Good
think
question.
would be better?
No, nothing really. I don't know. I mean, I feel like we still need something that I don't want to delay us sending this off. So I guess I'd rather get it off than try to, oh shoot, now you came off screen share.
Oh, did you want me to put the screen share back?
No, that's fine.
Okay.
I don't know. I mean, I guess it just, to me, the whole idea of countersigning, like, I guess, okay, maybe, sorry, I'm not thinking clear. The kids are noisy and I'm solo with them tonight. So maybe something about, maybe the way around the idea of like a hanging out countersigned lease is that there has to be like, I mean, okay, for example, our right to renew has stipulations for like when I as a landlord have to get a lease out and when it has to be returned by the tenant, right? Like, why is there a way that we can address that countersigning issue with a tenant also has to complete a lease within 10? I guess that's the kind of thing that I'm thinking about. Like, is there a way to address the countersigning issue more specifically? So if right to renew says that if the landlord gives you the lease, and I can't remember what we ended up wordsmithing out, I'd have to look back, but that there's a certain X number of days, 10 days, 14 days, whatever it is. I think it's 10. Is there reason to put something like that in general out into the universe so that like a hanging out lease must be countersigned by the landlord within X number of days, or something like that? It doesn't have a lot of value because if they just don't, and the lease isn't valid. But I'm just trying to think of another way that like, if I as a tenant could know that my lease must be countersigned within 10 days or it's invalid, and then what, like, and maybe that's the question. I don't know. I guess I'm speaking more to the lawyery folks. Like, is there any reason to specify that? We've specified by which a tenant has to return it with right to renew. Do lawyery folks feel like this paragraph is, sufficient to kind of cover that countersigning issue?
So Nick or Gail, I'm just looking at 8/5/30 and it talks about notice. I just had it. The notice must specify the date by which the tenant must notify. Just had it right here. Oh. Yeah, thanks.
No worries. Yeah, okay. Let's see. Here it is. So landlord may now enter into an agreement to rent the lease premises to another tenant for a subsequent lease period until 150 days before the end of the current lease period. Yeah, I believe that's right.
So isn't the question then whether offering a lease but not signing it, whether that's entering into an agreement to rent the premises?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I guess we all thought that it was, and then this practice started happening, and I'm not aware of any time that's been challenged in the courts. Jeff, I saw your hand go up, but wait, Nick, were you first? I'm sorry.
It doesn't matter. Jeff, if you want to go, that's okay.
Thank you. I have some concern about the wording of the second one as well. would having a rule that says that just a lease cannot be offered before the 150 days take away tenants' abilities to plan as well in terms of current tenants? Would it be better to change it to say they can't require a tenant to sign a lease before 150 days, but it could be offered? If that makes sense.
Yeah, so I see what you're saying. Well, I think the issue is that no one's requiring tenants to sign now, but tenants think they are signing because they think that they're getting this unit and they're not.
I guess I mean for current tenants, like for example, if my lease isn't up until December and I know I'm going to stay here, it seems like the wording of the second amendment would mean that I couldn't approach my landlord now and say, you know what, I've still got 6 months left of my lease, but I plan on staying. Can I just have a lease now?
I don't believe that's prohibited. Correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, the land, like you said, I believe the language is that the landlord can't require a current tenant to make a decision sooner than 150 days before the end of the lease, but I don't believe there's anything from preventing anything that prevents a current tenant and a landlord from entering into an agreement if the tenant so chooses.
Okay, I'm just reading that first
correct me
paragraph.
correct me if I'm wrong, but yeah,
I'm just reading that first bolded line, and it kind of seems to imply any tenant, even a current one. Maybe if that was specified.
Which
I'm sorry, which one are you looking at?
Yeah, the second suggested amendment. Yeah,
right here.
Oh,
no, in the report, City Council.
It doesn't, at least in the bolded part, it doesn't say to say new tenant.
That's a good point.
I think is the kind of the hang up, right?
Point. Yeah.
So new tenants or replacement tenants or something like that, perhaps.
It's certainly a wordy
Can I ask you a question? Are landlords sending out these offers, the tenants signing them and then getting them back, and they're just kind of sitting on them? Is that what's happening? They're just like putting them in their back pocket?
They get them back unsigned by the landlord. Like they will be given a lease. They will think that they have a signed lease. And then the landlord will have never signed it. And so then 7, 8, 9 months later, when the landlord's like, oh, hey, we never actually had a lease, you don't have a house, or an apartment, in some cases that I heard, then there's no recourse for the tenant who thought they had a lease. And money has been exchanged without an agreement signed by both parties, which I think is a separate, a related situation. But yeah, I mean, they'll have the tenant sign, give the tenants the lease back, unsigned by them, and the tenants are walking around thinking that they actually have like an executed lease.
Right. Some landlords are provide a little bit more clarity and say, we will, we're giving you the lease, sign the lease, if on March 15th, the current tenant lets us know that they're not renewing, then we will countersign your lease. But it still puts tenants in a precarious situation because potentially new tenants in a precarious situation, because then they're on the hook for that lease if a tenant doesn't renew. So if something else comes up, they can't, find another housing option. They're bound to the lease, but the landlord is not.
But Gail, how is it not under 8530 paren 1C? The notice must specify the date by which the tenant must notify the landlord of the tenant's acceptance of a successive lease.
I'm sorry, where are you reading
under
again?
8531C?
This is new, John. This would be new.
That's a current tenant.
Oh no, that's 8. You're talking about. I'm sorry. You're talking about.
I'm sorry. What was the provision again, John?
1. Okay.
Okay, I'm thinking of 8531. I'm thinking of current tenants, not other tenants. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So it's the new. I think we're talking about the prospective tenants that are then on the hook, even though landlords really aren't.
Nick?
Oh, I guess my hand's still up. There's just a few things that strike me as curious about this. First of all, I've always regarded one thing about this sort of loophole that's being exploited. It is true that tenants are going to think they have a signed lease, but I believe under the law, until that is accepted, and not just accepted by the landlord, but a signed copy delivered to the contract to the tenants, that they don't have a binding lease. I remember seeing a case a long time ago that a contract is not effective, that delivery is an essential part of a contract. In other words, one party can't just sit on a written contract without delivering a copy to the other side. Be that as it may, that highlighted language and 2B, which is a few paragraphs down, almost implies that it almost gives approval for a landlord receiving a signed lease from a tenant and sitting on it. Because it says, hey, you've accepted the terms and conditions of the lease. You gave me a signed lease. It doesn't say I have to sign it and give it back to you. So I'm wondering if that the way that's worded and it's not tightened up almost encourages that practice. I don't know if anybody agrees, disagrees, but I'm one of my concerns when we worked on 8.531 was that it didn't necessarily correspond in lockstep with 8.530. And it would be nice maybe to tighten up the language. Those are just some of my off the top of the head thoughts.
Well, thank you, Nick. I don't think we need to provide an ultra specific amendment to 8530 to the city council and say, this is exactly what you should do. I do think that flagging this as a problem is good and saying you need to work on the language.
The whole purpose, sorry.
Oh, yeah, I was just going to say, even if there are other aspects to fixing this problem, I think that we should still move forward tonight and providing this report to members of city council and continuing to work with them to figure out exactly what the wording of the solution will be.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I feel. John.
What I will say about 8.530, the early leasing and the early entry, and 8.531 is that they were meant to protect existing tenants. They're not really designed to protect prospective tenants or new tenants. They're trying to, how do we keep people in their apartments, in their housing, and how do we keep them from being hassled by landlords traipsing people through to pressure them to lease and that. So maybe tweaks are needed if protections of prospective tenants and the terms are going to be regulated. That just kind of my thought, given, it's the right to renew rather than a right to get an apartment that's currently rented.
Sure. Yeah, thank you, John, for that perspective. Jeff.
John, would you suggest perhaps that like a whole separate subparagraph or addition that it addresses new tenants or prospective tenants would be more appropriate?
Maybe you'd have to see if Michigan law doesn't already do that for us. If there's housing law or landlord tenant law, things like that. So I mean is like, and maybe it needs an amendment to deal with those, kind of some thought about it rather than just doing it on the fly at 9:30 on a Thursday night, but potentially, yeah. You'd have to give some thoughts to what are the concerns of prospective tenants, and obviously a wait list is a prospective tenant concern rather than existing tenant concern. An existing tenant doesn't care about wait lists because he's or she good to go. They've got it. They've got that right to renew. And that's where the prospective tenants, the wait lists and the returning a lease, if you're going to make an offer to a prospective tenant, you got to sign it. So it's clear that it's an offer so that they can sign it and bind the parties.
Thank you, John. Jamie?
Yeah, just a quick question. I'm wondering if anyone has knowledge of, I guess exactly what we're talking about. So an existing tenant is offered a lease renewal, they sign it, they don't receive a countersigned lease, and then they don't end up, like, the landlord takes it back and they don't end up with the lease that they thought they had. Is anyone aware of that happening? Just out of curiosity.
Are you speaking just about existing tenants or
Yeah,
people
yeah.
who want to renew
Mm-hmm.
or offered?
I haven't heard of an existing renewal lease not being countersigned.
Right. It's like they're trying to lock you guys in on day one. You know, before Halloween, you're re-upping. So it just flies in the face of how they behave with respect to getting renewals as quickly as they can with the current tenants.
Okay. Yeah, I think that I personally have some other ideas for how to make sure that people are aware of what's been signed and what has been signed, including requiring landlords to inform prospective tenants about what's going on. I've seen that with other laws where the landlords need to explain this is not a contract, and like a signed contract by me or something like that. Anyway, there's other ways to go about solving this problem, but I feel that the recommendation number 2 would be positive, and I think that we should have ongoing conversations with city council members. And for that reason, I think that if everyone does feel comfortable passing this report on to city council, I think that we should do that. However, if anyone feels that we should wait longer or remove the recommendations, for example, and pass that in separate resolutions, we can do that. But I personally support taking a vote on this as a commission and providing it, hopefully, to city council. Okay, Nick.
If you need a motion, also move.
Okay, that's a motion to send this on to city council?
Correct.
Okay.
This excellent report.
Thank you. And thank you to everyone who has worked on it. Okay, do we have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Lucy. Okay, all those in favor of adopting this report and sending on to city council, say aye.
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 Aye. All those opposed, say nay. Wonderful. Thank you very much. We will send this on to Kristen. I guess Kristen, you already have that, but I did make some tweaks, so I will send on the newest version on to you. And I'm excited to continue conversations with the city council about this. This has got to be a dynamic process, so look forward to it. And anyone who's interested in talking with city council members, I think just maybe message Kristen, and then we can get a group together to maybe start having these conversations. Wonderful. So now we can move on to 6-D, discussion of establishing a liaison to the Housing and Human Services Advisory Board and Human Rights Commission. Kristen, do you know who would like to introduce this?
I have some information on it that I'll share with the group.
Thank you.
So there is currently no appointed liaison to the Housing and Human Services Advisory Board. Staff there was having a little bit of trouble with, or I guess it just was a tough commitment for a member of that group to commit to attending a renters commission meeting every month. They are a week after their meetings. So it's kind of two weeks in a row of night meetings. So they're kind of brainstorming if there is a shared or a hybrid liaison role. And if anyone on this group would be willing to kind of share the attending the meeting and reporting back role with someone on the HHSAB. And that could be flexible. It could look like attending, maybe attending every other meeting or scheduling like a phone call with someone on the HHSAB and then reporting here, or something kind of like that. So we don't have to decide today, especially since there's a few members absent, but if there's any ideas or interest in kind of sharing that role rather than having the full commitment be on an HHSAB member, I welcome that discussion.
Any thoughts on this idea?
I believe that meeting is also on a Thursday. Is it? I just remember reading of the second Thursday of each month.
Yes, it is. I believe the second Thursday. So the Thursday right before ours.
Jeff?
I would be, depending on the time commitment, what we decide would be an appropriate level. I would be interested in possibly filling that role.
Thank you, Jeff. I'm hoping that when we get more members of the commission, that we can have new people take up that task as well.
Right. This is something we can make a little bit more official in a couple of months, hopefully after there have been more appointments too. And then kind of go ahead.
I will also just add, Jeff, for you, that commission being a little bit more, I would say, staff driven in terms of kind of some of the reporting out and them kind of providing more advice to OCED staff and stuff like that. It tends to be a shorter meeting, so it might be a lesser lift for you than for their member to come over to our meeting, but generally probably like an hour and a half meeting over there.
Awesome. Cool. And then sort of related, the Human Rights Commission, I spoke with the chair of that group last week, and they will be joining the Renters Commission at your June meeting to do a presentation on some of their work. And during that discussion, they expressed that they were looking for some, just like a connection with the Renters Commission and a little bit more renter perspective in their process. And they, one of the ideas they had was kind of doing like a monthly phone call, or maybe being available to like consult if there was a like renter related issue that they were taking up. And if anyone on this group was particularly interested in that, we can also bring it up. We have more people. Might be more interesting after we hear from the HRC in June to know a little bit more about their work. I expect that time commitment to be not very significant monthly, probably about an hour. Something to think about. Great, that's all I have for that item. We can move to planning for the May meeting.
Thank you, Kristen. I think those are good ideas of establishing liaison to both those bodies. So planning for our next meeting, which will take place on May 18th. Let's open the floor if anyone has any suggestions for what we should discuss on during our next meeting. Oh, Jeff, I saw your hand go up.
Yeah, I figured I should just say now, I have a conflict with that date, a rehearsal, a dress rehearsal, so I will not be able to attend if it is on that date. But that will be the last one for quite a while.
No worries. Good to know. Thanks, Jeff. I hope it goes well. Great. Any ideas for what to discuss? There actually,
And Jamie, is there any point in kind of having more discussion about what our goal from like listening sessions is and that kind of thing? I know the three of us had a little bit of text chat after the I don't know, guess just throwing that out there if we're looking for content.
Could definitely report on that today during the report from committee's item, or if you'd like to put together like a more formal presentation, I think that would be fine too. We can schedule that for the next meeting.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I would like to put together maybe some thoughts and suggestions for future listening sessions too.
since we are going a bit long tonight again, I would encourage you to do it, to present your, I guess, a summary of that event at the next meeting. You can mention a few takeaways during the report back, so if you'd like. I would like, I think we should discuss this issue. I've heard actually from a number of people suddenly about tenants not being notified about the demolition, about proposed redevelopment of their building. And so until it's very late in the process, so tenants think that they're going to be able to renew for the next year, but then suddenly find out very late in the leasing cycle that their building's actually just been approved to be demolished and then rebuilt. And I've heard this from two separate people. I think at least two, actually three. And I had never really thought about the issue. I think that we should discuss that at our next meeting. Jeff.
Yeah, I hate to make a suggestion for a meeting I'm not going to be at, but I do remember receiving those two communications. One was about the issue that you had mentioned, and then there was one that came through just in the last day or so, might have been today, that might be something to address as well, or at least look at.
Thanks, Jeff. Kristen?
I can work with staff to put together some more information on the city's role in that process. Heather mentioned it briefly earlier, the developer's role in engagement. So I'll put together some, or maybe get some input from some other staff on kind of the city's rules on it and how it's taken place at some recent developments.
Thank you, Kristen. Jordan?
We consider for a future meeting a little bit of education about who does what in the city, in terms of, I think I mentioned it in an email, I just forgot to bring it up right now, but who does what, like as far as what Housing Commission does versus Avalon, and how those types of subsidies help, because I feel like these are really vulnerable populations, and even I, being in this world, don't have a whole lot of understanding about how referrals to that work, how funding works, whose contract trumps whose contract, those kind of things. Maybe for May or June, even, not if May is looking full.
That would be a great opportunity for the Renters Commission, and also part of the work plan was to get some education on that process. So I'll reach out to staff.
Great. Anyone else? Well, other ideas can be submitted to Kristen. If you think of something that we should discuss as they come up, just email me, please. Okay. Then we will move on to item 7, reports. Let's try to go through this fairly quickly. So our city council members, we can start with Cynthia. You have a report?
I don't have anything to report on at this moment.
Thank you. Travis?
Just that we are in the throes of budget season, and so everything is all budget for the next couple of weeks here. Cynthia and I have, I'm digging through the budget myself, but I've also just submitted a question directly to the administrator about whether or not his proposed budget resolves the staffing enforcement issue that we have discussed before, and if not, about approximately how much he feels he would need to fill that role. So once I get an answer on that, it's something that I'll be looking at in our budget negotiations as well. And then I attended the listening session and just want to kudos to everyone who was involved in that. I know it was a really great session. I will allow them to actually report out on it. But I know Jamie and Jordan were on the ground there, and we had pretty considerable turnout, and they handled it really well. So just want to applaud all of the work that went into that.
Thank you. Okay, we can go down to 7-D, report from staff liaison.
I have a ton to report. I will send out some links to some of the information that Heather mentioned earlier, like the opportunity index and some of the other equitable engagement items. And I'll also send information on the budget, the city council meetings that have to do with budget to this group, so you know when those dates are.
Great, thank you. And then we can open up to reports from commissioners. So if you are a commissioner and you'd like to give a report, just raise your hand and we'll do it that way. I think there was a recent workshop. I think it was organized by Washington Housing Alliance. I have to look back, but it was recorded about being a tenant advocate. I'll send it out to everybody. I think everyone should watch it if you have the time. Jamie.
Yeah, I'll keep it brief, but just wanted to say I also thought the listening session was a success. We had a lot of really great conversations, met some awesome folks, a lot of folks from the courthouse, senior living apartment complex. And yeah, we learned a lot about what's been going on there. And I was interested to hear about the liaison for the Human Rights Commission, because I was kind of wondering if that might be a situation that we should kind of fill them in on, because it sounds like there's a multitude of issues going on there with those residents. So yeah, more information to come, hopefully at the next meeting about that.
Yeah, and if there are members of the commission who do want to like meet about that issue, what's going on with Courtyard, it's called Courtyard, right? It's a courthouse.
House.
Thank you. Yeah, I think just maybe send an email to Jordan, Jamie, and me, and we can organize a meeting if everyone does want to meet and talk about that. We have to be careful of quorum, unless we do make it a posted meeting, which is possible. But okay, Lucy.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to Jamie. I mean, first of all, thank you so much for the write-up on what's happening there. While we're all in the meeting, I wanted to ask whoever knows, maybe John, maybe someone else. So I don't know if you saw the memo, John, but part of the situation, there's a lot of bad things that are happening in this apartment complex, is that the landlords are serving eviction notices over things that are not, by any stretch of the imagination, evictable offenses. So I don't know if there's what the legality of that is, or what the recourse would be for those tenants.
So are we talking at the courthouse or just generally?
Yeah, courthouse.
Okay. So if they're getting eviction notices, then obviously, I assume, given what someone just said, it's not student housing, so it's unlikely that Gail would be helping out. But there's legal services, and there's also a clinic at U of M that might be able to help them. Nick and Gail might have some other suggestions for resources that could help tenants who are facing eviction.
I just want to. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Travis.
John, I can also jump in there too. So we have connected. So I reached out to Libby Benton, who was with Legal Services of South Central Michigan last time issues came up at this exact same property. So she is, I connected her with Jordan, and I believe she's helping to reconnect Legal Services this time around, and fill in on the history there on this site. One of the challenges, it sounded like from our conversations with several of the tenants, was that the claim is that a number of these eviction notices are coming for violations of the lease, but when asked for the lease, they are not actually being provided an actual copy of their lease. They're being provided a one-page document that says, here's what your rent is, and here's the length of your lease. It doesn't actually show the terms so that they can dispute whether or not they're violating them. There were a number of issues with this site. And so I know we are engaging with Legal Services to get them engaged as well.
I think that I think that we should discuss the details maybe in a separate group.
Yeah.
But yeah. Okay. Lucy, do you have anything else to add on there? Because I think that we should meet, a subgroup should meet on this. I just think that now is not the time to get into the nitty-gritty of all of it. I'm extremely concerned about the situation though.
Okay, I understand.
Okay. So yeah, I think that we should email and figure out a time then. Okay, great. Then we can move. Jordan, was there anything else you wanted to add?
Oh, sorry. No, I was just proposing that I gotta go soon. So
okay,
we
great.
jumped
Yeah.
on it
So let's
again.
move on.
Yeah.
So item 8, the second general public comment.
Right. Anyone who'd like to address the Renters Commission about any topic for up to 3 minutes can call 877-853-5247 or 888-788-0099 and enter meeting ID 935-8080-1941. You are joining with the web link. That link is a2gov.org/renters commission meeting. And if you are calling in, you can press *9 to raise your hand, or if you are in the Zoom meeting, you can use the raise hand feature. So if you would like to address the Renters Commission, go ahead and raise your hand now, or call in it or join with the link. We do have an attendee, so we'll give them a moment in case they'd like to raise their hand.
All right. I think we're good to move on.
Yes.
Thank you, Kristen. So we'll move on to the second to last item, which is communication. We had, I think it was 3 communications. So I can show them very briefly here. One was from a parent of a tenant regarding poor conditions, a bad upkeep of rental units, and high cost. These are things we've been aware of.
If it's a specific issue and the person's child is a student, you can refer them to our office.
Yeah, Kristen, have you sent that? Have you referred them to SLS?
I didn't, but I will.
Thank you very much. Okay. And then the second communication was regarding that demolition issue. I think we're going to have a longer conversation about rules that need to change to prevent this from happening again.
And I can give you some updates next time.
Okay.
From my experience.
Thank you, Gail. Okay. And then the last communication, which was already shown, was regarding the analysis of costs for all electric versus mixed. Okay. Any comments on those communications before we move on to adjournment? All right. If you have any insights, you can always email to Kristen. And then that moves us on to item 10, which is adjournment. We have a motion to adjourn tonight.
So moved.
Thank you, Jeff. Second?
Second.
Seconded by Lucy. Thank you. All those in favor of adjourning, say aye.
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 All those opposed, say nay. Okay. With that, we're adjourned. Thank you so much for tonight's meeting. I really enjoyed the discussion.
Thanks very much. Have a good night.
Good night, everyone.
Bye.